They chuckled as the young woman was put up for sale in shackles until a solitary cattleman declared, "My son needs you." Dust Hollow, New Mexico Territory, July 1878. A blistering sun loomed above the parched, fractured ground like a malediction. Fine particles of earth swirled into the air with each footfall on the improvised timber platform erected in the heart of the settlement. The throng had already swollen to a dense mass. Fellows clad in grime-caked waistcoats, intoxicated by spirits and malice, assembled for the sort of display that only untamed frontiers permitted. This wasn't an ordinary trading session. It was an open degradation. Bound at the wrists by corroded metal links, Karen Mayfield, 22, remained shoeless atop the dais. Her gown, formerly a soft ivory hue, now dangled in shreds. Her forearms oozed blood where the restraints bit into her flesh, yet her posture stayed rigid. Her jaw elevated. Her eyes, emerald and keen like fragments of broken bottle, glared down at the males assembled beneath. There was no terror, merely rage. An inebriated MC hollered across the clamor, his speech garbled. "Property of Mayfield the Elder, gambling debt to be settled. Fair and square? She's healthy. Stubborn maybe, but that can be broken in." The crowd roared. Some clapped. Others laughed. Karen did not flinch. When one man shouted, "Smile for us, sweetheart!" she stepped forward, the chains clinking around her ankles, and spat at the ground. Then she spoke loud and clear, her voice ringing out like iron striking steel. "None of you can buy my soul," the laughter faltered. A man in a brown hat climbed onto the stage. He was tall, sweat glistening on his brow, and wryer of tobacco and rot-gut whiskey. Without warning, he backhanded her across the face. Her head snapped sideways, blood welled at the corner of her lip. The crowd cheered again, but Karen, eyes wide, lip bleeding, turned slowly back to face them, lifted her chin higher and smiled, not sweetly. The announcer laughed nervously and gestured to the bidding board. "All right then, let's not waste time. Who's first?" From the back of the crowd, a voice drawled. "I'll give $20 for her." Heads turned. The crowd parted like wheat in wind. Jeb Crowley, owner of the largest cattle operation this side of the POS, swaggered forward. His vest was lined with gold stitching, and his boots were polished, unlike the rest of him. His face twisted into a grin as he climbed onto the platform. He looked Karen up and down like a butcher choosing meat. $20, he said again. "Hell, I'll even throw in a wedding ring. Not that she'll need one." He turned to the crowd and added, laughing, "I'll teach this little filly what obedience means." The crowd burst into cruel approval. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. In Thedesty Street below, a small boy stood gripping the hand of a tall, silent man. Eli, 6 years old, thin as a stalk of corn, looked up at his father. His small voice was barely a whisper. She looked sad like Mama did before she left. Theman's name was Sam Colt Train, a rancher, widower-rower, and ex-gunzer. His gray eyes lifted to the stage, his jaw clenched. For a long moment he did not move. Then he did. He stepped forward, boots thudding against the earth, and walked through the parting crowd. No one said a word as he climbed the steps. The auctioneer frowned. "What's your bid, mister?" Sam reached into his coat, pulled out a single gold coin, and placed it gently on the edge of the platform. "Whom dollar?" Laughter exploded from the crowd. "Hell, she's worth 10 times that," someone hollered. Sam ignored them all. His voice was low, but carried like thunder through silence. "I am not buying her. I'm bringing her home because my son needs her more than I do." Karen stared at him. He did not leer, did not touch her, just stood, arms by his side, shoulders still. Dust blew between them. The crowd grew quiet. Even Jeb Crowley stopped smiling. In the silence, Eli took a slow step forward, still clutching a carved wooden horse in his tiny hands. For the first time that day, Karen blinked, and her jaw trembled ever so slightly. And just like that, the chains on her wrists stopped feeling like a sentence. They felt like a beginning. The train ranch, 2 mi west of Dust Hollow. The sky was turning amber when they arrived. The land stretched endlessly in every direction, scorched and quiet. The wooden house stood weather-beaten, a porch barely holding together with wild grass brushing against its steps. Karen stepped down from the wagon without help. Her wrists were free now, though they still bore the raw marks of the iron cuffs. She didn't speak, and neither did Sam. He simply nodded toward the door. "I'll make up the guest room," he said. "You'll have privacy." She followed him into the house, eyes cautious, every muscle tight like a cornered animal. The air inside smelled of smoke, dry wood, and something faintly sweet. Lavender, perhaps, lingering from a time long gone. There was no sign of other women. No laughter, no warmth, just silence. On the hallway, a small face peeked out, a boy with shaggy blonde hair and hollow eyes. He clutched a stuffed horse with one arm, the fabric worn at the seams. Heron froze. The child stared at her for several seconds, expression unreadable before disappearing behind the doorframe again. "That's Eli," Sam said simply, setting down her bag. "He don't talk. Not since his mother passed." Karen said nothing. That night she ate alone at the table. Sam sat across from her, hands folded, barely touching his stew. "You ain't a prisoner here," he said after a long silence. "You can leave when you want, but until then, this is your home." Heron looked down at her bowl, then back at him. "You do this for every woman you rescue from an auction." Sam did not smile. "You're the first." The following days passed like ghosts through the house. Quiet, slow, uncertain. Karen stayed mostly indoors, helping where she could, sweeping, fixing loose boards, fetching water from the well. She moved like someone walking in borrowed skin. Eli watched her from shadows. He never approached, never spoke. Sometimes she'd catch his eyes through a doorway or hear the soft squeak of his wooden horse dragging behind him. On the fourth morning, she found a bundle on the porch, a basket wrapped in cloth filled with fresh bread and dried apples. Tucked between the loaves was a folded scrap of paper. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "A woman is not to be sold. She is to be loved. Martha." Karen sat on the steps for a long while. The note crumpled in her hand. She remembered Martha, the only person in that crowd who had not laughed, who had not looked away, an old woman with stern eyes and hands that had known both war and softness. It was the first kindness she had received in months. That evening, as the sun dipped low and gold light spilled across the floorboards, Karen stood in the hallway, watching Eli from a distance. He sat near the fireplace, legs crossed, the wooden horse in his lap. She cleared her throat. "Do you want me to fix him?" "His leg's loose," she said, kneeling beside him. Eli looked up, startled. For a second, it seemed he might speak, but then he shook his head and hugged the toy tighter. Karen didn't push. Instead, she whispered, "I had one too. When I was your age, I named her Sati. She was missing an eye, but always knew when I was sad." Eli said nothing, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. Karen stayed a moment longer before rising. In the kitchen, Sam glanced at her. "How's he doing?" She paused, then answered softly, "He's grieving, just quieter than most." Sam nodded once. "You don't have toast day," he said again, not meeting her eyes. "I know," Karen replied. "But the quiet here, it doesn't hurt like the quiet back there." Outside, the wind stirred the dry fields. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Dust Hollow still wire of cruelty and ash. But here on this lonely ranch, something small, fragile, hesitant had begun to breathe. Karen sat alone on the back steps, the hem of her skirt brushing against dry earth. The wind rustled through the brittle grass, carrying scents of sage and distant smoke. In her hands, she held a half-darned shirt Eli had outgrown, fingers motionless on the thread. Her eyes stared far past the fence line, past the hills towards something no one could see. Memories came unbidden. A ballroom in New York, candlelight on crystal glasses, laughter that never reached the eyes. And him, Walter Barrett, tall, polished, full of empty promises. He had courted her with poems, letters, silver pendants, told her she was unlike any woman he'd met. Then the day before the wedding, the truth. He was already married, and she, just a pawn in a petty game between powerful men. When she confronted him, he had laughed. "You're not the kind of woman men marry, Karen. You're the kind they practice on." She had fled in shame, alone, penniless, heartbroken so violently, it left no pieces. She blinked, shaking herself back into the present. Behind her, the floor creaked. Sam's footsteps were slow, deliberate. He stood a few paces behind her, hands in his pockets. "You all right?" Karen didn't turn. "Do you ever wish you could forget where you came from?" A pause. "Every day," Sam said. He walked past her and leaned against the porch beam. His gaze was on the horizon too, but not looking, remembering. "I used to be faster than any man west of the Rio Grande," he said quietly. "People paid me good money to make other men disappear. One bullet clean. I told myself it was just a job." Karen glanced at him. He didn't blink. "I gave it up when I met Mary. She never asked about the blood. She just saw through it. We had Eli a year later. I built this house with my own hands." He paused, jaw tight. She was getting apples. "Market day, some drifter tried to take her purse, shot her when she screamed." Karen lowered her eyes. Wheelie was with her. He was 4. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Karen said, "He does not trust me." "He does not trust anyone," Sam replied. "Not since that day." That night, the wind howled like a wounded thing. Karen stirred from sleep to a soft sound, muffled cries. She pulled the shawl tighter and stepped into the hall. Eli's door was open. She found him curled in a tight ball under the quilt, hands clutching the wooden horse, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. "Mama, don't go," he whimpered. "Mama, please, come back." Taryn's chest clenched. Without thinking, she crossed the room, knelt beside the bed, and reached for him. He flinched at first, then clung to her like a drowning child to driftwood. She wrapped her arms around him, rocking gently. "I'm here," she whispered. "You're safe. I'm not going anywhere tonight." She stayed until his breathing slowed, tears soaking into her sleeve. At dawn, she sat with a cup of weak coffee on the porch, eyes swollen but calm. Sam joined her, watching the sun climb. "Did he have another nightmare?" Karen nodded. He was calling for her. A pause. "Did he say anything to you?" She looked over and for a moment her voice caught. "He said, 'Please come back.' Then after I held him, he said, 'Do not leave.'" Sam's breath hitched. He covered his mouth with one hand as if to keep it from trembling. He has not spoken a word to anyone in 2 years. Karen set the cup down slowly. Her fingers trembled. "I do not think he was talking to his mother anymore," she said. "I think he meant me." Neither of them spoke after that. But something invisible shifted between them. A thread pulled taut. A silence now filled with meaning. The chains that once bound Karen in public were gone. But here in this fragile home of ghosts and grief, she realized something far more binding was forming where you, and for the first time in years, it did not feel like a trap. It felt like belonging. The sound of hooves shattered the morning quiet. Dust spiraled in the distance, rising like smoke as 4 Redders approached the Coltrane Ranch at a steady, deliberate pace. At their lead was Jeb Crowley, his vest flapping open in the wind, hat pulled low, and a scowl stretched across his face like dried leather. Karen spotted them first from the window. Her heart skipped. She stepped back from the sill and turned sharply. "Sam!" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're coming." He was already reaching for his hat. Karen hurried to the front door where Eli stood frozen, clutching her skirt. She knelt beside him and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Stay inside, Eli. Do not open the door." He nodded once, wide-eyed, and backed into the shadows of the hall. Karen remained behind the door, but cracked it just enough to see. Sam walked slowly toward the gate, boots silent against the packed dirt. He passed the post where his rifle hung and left it untouched. His hand stayed by his sides. Jeb and his men reined their horses to a stop just outside the property line. "Well, well," Jeb called, voice thick with arrogance. "Thought I'd pay a visit, seeing as you still got something that belongs to me." Sam didn't move. "She's not a thing." Jeb chuckled and spat to the side. "She's collateral. I paid for her legally. You paid for a lie, and I paid your auctioneer what he asked. You think a single coin makes her yours?" "She is not mine," Sam said, voice level. "She's free, but she is here, and I will not let you take her." One of Jeb's men, young, twitchy, fingers always near the grip of his pistol, leaned in. "Boss, this is a waste. Let's just drag her out." Karen's breath caught. She reached for Eli's hand again, squeezing tight. His little fingers trembled in hers. The man edged his horse forward and placed a hand on his revolver. Sam took a single step closer to the gate. Then slowly, deliberately, he let his right hand brush the top of his holster. He did not draw. He did not raise his voice, but his eyes locked on the would-be gunman, steady as stone. "If you want to try," he said, "you better shoot fast, but know this. That little boy behind that door is watching, and he has already buried one parent. The silence was immediate, heavy, oppressive. The young gunman swallowed hard. Jeb narrowed his eyes. You threatening us, Coltrane? Sam didn't blink. No, just telling you what's at stake. A long moment passed. The breeze stirred the dust around their boots. Then Jeb sneered, pulled the reins back sharply, and turned his horse. Come on. Ain't worth the trouble. The others hesitated but followed, the young one last to leave, his gaze never meeting Sam's again. Karen pushed the door open as they rode away. She stepped out, Eli behind her, both of them wordless. Sam remained at the gate, eyes still fixed on the road long after the dust had settled. When Karen reached him, she didn't speak. Instead, she stood beside him in the quiet. Only after a full minute did she whisper, "You could have killed them." "I could have," he replied. "But I don't want mice in thinking a gun is how you end every threat." Karen looked back at the house where Eli stood in the doorway watching. "I think you just taught him something bigger than that." And for the first time since she'd arrived, her hand brushed lightly, unintentionally against his. Neither of them moved away. The days rolled by with the rhythm of simple living, mornings filled with chores, afternoons chasing shade, and evenings thick with the hum of crickets. Slowly, like snow melt in spring, the space between Karen and Sam began to thaw. They mended fences together, side by side, the scrape of hammer on wood breaking silences that used to feel too heavy. Karen rolled up her sleeves, sweat lining her brow, not out of obligation, but quiet resolve. Sam would hand her a nail without speaking, and she would take it without looking. In the garden, they pulled weeds and planted new roots, onions, tomatoes, carrots. When Sam showed her how to twist the soil just right, his hand brushed hers. Neither flinched. Eli grew more open, too. Karen read aloud to him each night by the fireplace, tracing letters with his tiny fingers. Sometimes he'd lean against her side, cheek resting gently on her arm, and she'd pause, heart aching with something too soft to name. And Sam. He watched the way she tucked the quilt tighter around Eli's shoulders, how she smiled when he got a word right. He watched her fingers flutter when she thought no one saw, how she stood outside at dusk staring at the sky like she was waiting for a sign. One night the rain came hard. Thunder echoed across the plains, rattling the shutters and turning the dry earth to mud. Karen had not come down for supper. Sam knocked once on her door, then opened it. She was curled in bed, soaked in sweat, her cheeks flushed with fever. The basin beside her was half filled with cold water. The lamp flickered low. He crossed to her quickly and touched her forehead. "Too hot, Karen," he murmured, shaking her gently. "Karen, wake up." Her eyes opened slowly, glassy and unfocused. "I'm fine," she whispered voice. "No, you are not." He pulled the quilt back damp with heat and fetched fresh water. He soaked a cloth, pressed it to her head. When she shivered, he sat beside her and took her hand between his own, rubbing gently to warm it. Minutes passed. The storm raged outside. Karen stirred and looked at him, eyes clouded but searching. Why are you still here?" she asked weakly. Sam swallowed. "Because I have not met a woman like you since Mary," he said quietly. "And because I never thought I could need someone again. Not until I saw the way Eli looks at you." Karen blinked, eyes welling and without meaning to, her fingers curled into his. He leaned forward, their lips met, soft, unsure, lingering. A kiss born not of passion but pain, of longing, of the fragile, terrifying possibility of beginning again. But even before it ended, Karen's hand slipped from his. She turned her face away, tears streaking her fevered cheeks. "I cannot do this," she whispered. "I want to, God, I want to. But every time I feel close to something good, it disappears. It burns up. It leaves me alone." Sam looked at her, the candlelight catching every broken thing she tried to hide. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her damp forehead. "I am not going anywhere, Karen," she shook her head. "You say that now." "They all say that." He said nothing more. Instead, he stayed through the storm, through the dark, holding her hand until the fever broke. And when morning came and light spilled golden across the wooden floor, her hand was still in his. But the kiss, its ache, its truth, still hung heavy between them like smoke after fire. The sunrise crept over the hills in silence. Inside the cold, trained kitchen, A single sheet of paper lay folded on the table, weighed down by a smooth river stone. The ink was still fresh, though the hand that wrote it trembled the whole way through. Sam, I need to leave before I make this harder for both of us. What you and Eli have, it's good, whole. I do not belong in something that pure, not after everything. Thank you for giving me a home, even if it was never meant to last. Karen she had packed lightly. Just enough food for a day's walk. Her boots scuffed quietly against the earth as she stepped past the barn, past the line of fence posts they'd repaired together. She didn't look back. By the time Sam found the letter, the house was already too quiet. He stood over it, reading twice, jaw clenched tight. The screen door creaked behind him. Lee, he called. Ellie, no answer. He moved quickly. Checked the boys' room, the barn, the chicken coop, the shed. Empty. Panic rose like bile. He ran outside, scanning the land. There were no footprints in the mud. No sign of the boy. Then he saw them. 2 sets of small prints heading down the hill behind the orchard, and only 1 set coming back. Damn it! He hissed under his breath, grabbing his coat and rifle. The rain had come unexpectedly, sharp and cold, the kind that stung the skin and soaked through wool. Karen was barely 2 miles out when she heard Sam shouting in the distance. Karen, Eli's gone! She turned, heart dropping into her stomach. What do you mean, gone? She called, already running toward him. They met halfway, breath ragged, clothes dripping. He's not in the house, not anywhere. Karen's eyes widened. The hill, she said. The one with the tree where he goes sometimes alone. They ran without speaking. Thunder cracked above them. When they reached the old oak overlooking the valley, Karen stopped short. There, sitting at the base of the tree, was Eli, soaked, knees drawn to his chest, holding a handful of wildflowers crushed against his chest. Karen dropped to her knees beside him. Lay, she cried, pulling him close. What are you doing out here? You're freezing. The boy didn't answer. His small frame trembled violently, but his arm stayed wrapped around the flowers. Sam stepped closer, eyes wide, breath sharp in his throat. Eli turned to Karen, eyes red, voice cracked. If you leave, he whispered, I don't want to stay here, not without you. Karen froze. Rain slid down her face, or maybe it was tears she could not tell anymore. Oh, baby, she murmured, hugging him tightly. I wasn't leaving you. I thought I was protecting you. I thought you'd be better off without someone like me. Ellie pressed his face into her neck, clinging harder. You're the only one who makes the house not sad anymore. Sam stood a few feet away, hands useless at his sides. Karen looked up at him. I didn't think I mattered this much, she said quietly. You do? Sam said to both of us. The 3 of them sat beneath the tree until the rain softened to mist. When they finally stood, Karen took Eli's hand in one of hers and reached for Sam's with the other. They walked home without another word, but something had changed. Not just a reunion, a choice. And it was no longer just Karen's to make. The letter bore a federal seal. Karen's hands shook as she read it aloud by lamplight. The language was stiff, but the message was clear. A federal marshal had arrived in Dust Hollow to investigate unlawful transactions involving women, including her auction. She folded the letter slowly. They're calling it trafficking, she said, voice thin. They want me to testify or confess. Sam's jaw tightened. He said nothing at first. Then he walked to the door, took down his hat, and turned to face her. We're going to town tomorrow, he said together. The next morning, Dust Hollow was quieter than usual, but eyes followed them from every porch and alleyway as they rode into the heart of the town. The old saloon had been temporarily converted into a hearing hall. Wooden chairs lined the walls. ACOG board listed witnesses. The federal marshal, dressed in blue with silver trim, stood behind a makeshift desk like a judge in a church. Karen clutched her shawl tightly as she entered. Gasps rose. Whispers followed her. That's her, the girl in chains. Culra's woman now. Sam walked beside her, broad-shouldered and quiet. When they reached the front, the marshal looked up. Miss Mayfield, he said, you were sold in a public auction 3 months ago. Are you here of your own will? Karen opened her mouth to speak, but Sam stepped forward first. I'll speak, he said. The marshal raised a brow. And you are Sam Coltrane, rancher, the man who bought her. Murmur erupted. Sam's voice did not waver. I paid 1 coin, yes, but not to own her. I paid to stop her from being dragged into hell by Jeb Crowley and his kind. She came with me because I gave her a choice. If that makes me guilty, then I'll take the charge." Karen's eyes widened, he continued. "But do not punish her. And do not drag Ellery into this. He's just a boy. And for the first time since his mama died, he smiles again because she's with us." The marshal leaned back in his chair. "You realize what you're admitting to? I do. I also know the law has no business condemning the only decent thing that's happened to this woman in years." A tense silence fell. Then from the back of the room, a chair scraped loudly. Bombarda stood, leaning heavily on her cane. Her voice was firm. "Karen Mayfield is no criminal. She is a member of this town now, a better one than half the men who laughed that day." A man by the wall, once among the loudest during the auction, stood as well. "She saved my daughter from a snake bite. Wouldn't take a penny for it," another voice joined. "She teaches my boys letters every Sunday behind the church. I seen her clean the graves Noonel's visits. She brought us food when my wife fell ill." One by one voices rose, not in accusation, but in defense. The same people who once cheered her humiliation were now standing in her name. The marshal looked around the room, then down at the papers before him and back up. "Well," he said slowly, "I believe I've seen enough." He stood. "No charges will be filed, Miss Mayfield. You are free to go. And Mr. Coltrane, you may be a stubborn bastard, but I've seen worse." A soft wave of laughter broke through the tension. Karen turned to Sam, lips trembling. She wasn't smiling yet. Other eyes held something brighter than fear. Hope. As they stepped outside into the daylight, a small crowd followed, not to sneer but to thank her, to shake her hand, to nod at Sam with quiet respect. For the first time, Dust Hollow didn't feel like a place she had survived. It felt like a place she could belong. The wildflowers bloomed in colors the dry land rarely showed. Goldenrod, Indian paintbrush, tiny white daisies swayed beneath the open sky. It was the far edge of Coltrane land, untouched by fences or plows. Years ago, Sam had buried his wedding ring here, beside a flat stone under a mesquite tree, when grief had made the ranch feel like a graveyard. Now it was dressed in cloth banners and garlands of sage. A dozen townsfolk stood in a loose semicircle, neighbors, not strangers, quietly waiting. Karen stepped forward across the grass, her dress plain but radiant in the sunlight. There were no pearls, no veil, just a crown of woven herbs and her hair let down, flowing like the river she used to dream about escaping to. She carried no bouquet. She carried Eli's hand. The boy wore a shirt too big for him. The sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and in his palm was a small box of carved wood. When they reached Sam, Eli looked up at him and smiled. Something pure and real. Karen turned to face the man who had changed her life by not asking her to be anything but herself. "I used to think," she said softly, "that I had no say in where I belonged, that I'd always be taken, passed, given." Her voice shook slightly, but her eyes held steady. "But this time no one bought me. No one forced me. I'm here because I want to be." She paused, and the wind caught her hair. "I choose you, Sam. I choose Eli. I choose this." Sam's eyes, always guarded, now softened. "Huh?" His voice, low and rough as worn leather, met hers. "And Myson chose you long before I ever found the words." He turned to Eli, who stepped forward and opened the small box. Inside were 2 simple silver bands. Sam took one, slid it gently onto Karen's finger. Then she did the same for him. There was no preacher, no sermon, only the land and the sun and the truth between them. When they kissed, Eli clapped just once and everyone laughed. Later, they shared food under the tree where Sam once buried his grief. Children played in the tall grass. Karen sat with her back against the tree, Eli's head in her lap. Sam's hand wrapped around hers. It was not a grand wedding, but it was honest. And when the sun began to fall behind the hills, casting gold across the fields, Karen looked up and whispered Tono one in particular. "This time I am not someone's burden." She touched Thering. "I am someone's choice." And where once there had been a stage of chains and shame, there was now only earth and roots and something finally free. If this story moved your heart, if you felt the dust, the danger, and the quiet power of love that defies everything, then don't let it end here. Tap that like button. Share it with someone who still believes in second chances, And subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of passion, redemption, and the kind of love that only the frontier could forge. Because out here, where bullets missed but hearts didn't, love always leaves a mark. We'll see you in the next story, partner.